Unfortunately, I have some very sad news. I can confirm that our specialist police search and rescue team, who are continuing to search the storm drain complex, recovered the body of a young male in the North Belfast area just before 9:45 a.m. today.
On the surface, Noah Donohoe's life looked like the kind every parent hopes for their child. Born in Belfast in 2004, Noah grew up as a bright, talented, and kind-hearted boy. Those who knew him best often described him as gentle and mature beyond his years. He wasn't just another teenager lost in the shuffle of city life. Noah stood out. He had big dreams, and it seemed as though he had all the tools to achieve them. At just 14 years old, Noah was excelling in both academics and sports. A gifted student, he was enrolled at St. Malachy's College, one of Belfast's most respected schools. Teachers recognized his intelligence, his quiet determination, and his curiosity about the world around him. He was the type of boy who asked thoughtful questions, never satisfied with a surface-level answer. Outside the classroom, Noah's talents shone just as brightly. He was a promising athlete, passionate about basketball, and had represented Northern Ireland in the sport, a remarkable achievement for someone so young. His coaches spoke of his discipline and teamwork, while his friends admired his sense of humor and loyalty. But Noah wasn't defined only by his studies or his sport. He loved music, played the cello, and had a wide circle of friends who adored him for his kindness and warm personality. To his mother, Fiona, he wasn't just her only son, he was her entire world. They shared a bond that went beyond the ordinary, one built on trust, laughter, and the kind of unconditional love that left Fiona proud of the young man he was becoming. Those who knew Noah often said he was destined for something special. He had the intelligence, the creativity, and the drive to go far. He had a bright, promising future ahead of him, a future that seemed limitless. But in June 2020, all of that promise, all of that hope would be stolen away. What happened to Noah Donohoe over those fateful days would leave his family, his community, and an entire nation asking questions that remain unanswered to this day. Sunday, June 21st, 2020, began like any other summer's day in Belfast. The city was quiet under a soft gray sky, and for Noah Donohoe, it was meant to be a simple afternoon. He told his mother he was going out on his bike, something he often did. It was Father's Day, a day that should have been ordinary, filled with family moments, but instead it would become the beginning of a nightmare. At around 5:30 p.m., Noah left his home in the Ormeau Road area, wearing his cycling helmet and carrying a backpack. He was heading towards Cave Hill Park, a popular spot in North Belfast, about 6 miles away. It wasn't unusual for Noah to go for long bike rides. He was athletic and adventurous, but this journey would turn out to be anything but normal. CCTV footage would later piece together fragments of his movements. At first, he appeared calm, cycling along familiar streets, but soon the story took a strange and unsettling turn. Witnesses recalled seeing Noah cycling naked, his clothes discarded along his route. His school bag, helmet, and belongings would later be found scattered across different locations. Something had happened, something unexplained, that led to Noah abandoning his clothes, his phone, and even his bike. In the space of less than an hour, the bright, confident boy who had left home was suddenly vulnerable, exposed, and behaving in a way completely out of character. By 6 p.m., Noah had vanished. He didn't return home, and when Fiona realized her son was missing, panic set in. She knew immediately that something was wrong. This wasn't like Noah. He wasn't the kind of teenager to simply disappear without warning. That night, a search began. The community rallied quickly, with volunteers joining police to comb through streets, parks, and alleyways. Posters went up, appeals were made, and Fiona's voice echoed across the news and social media, pleading for her son's safe return. But as hours turned into days, hope began to collide with fear. Belfast had seen many tragedies before, but the disappearance of Noah Donohoe was different. He was just a boy on his bike, and yet he had somehow vanished into thin air. The city held its breath, waiting for answers that weren't coming. And as the search intensified, what was found only deepened the mystery. In the days after Noah's disappearance, detectives and volunteers worked tirelessly to trace his movements. The last confirmed images of him came from CCTV cameras, each fragment of footage offering more questions than answers. At first, the images were ordinary. Noah cycling along Belfast streets, his backpack on, helmet strapped. But somewhere along his route, the ordinary shifted into something deeply unsettling. His belongings began to appear, discarded in seemingly random places. His school bag was found on the shore road. His laptop and books, items Noah valued, were left behind. Not long after, his cycling helmet turned up, abandoned as if he had cast it aside mid-journey. And then came the most shocking detail of all: reports of Noah riding naked through the streets of North Belfast. Witnesses recalled the sight of the boy, vulnerable, distressed, exposed. For a child so careful, so meticulous, this behavior made no sense. Those who knew Noah described him as shy, modest, and deeply private. To see him in such a state was unthinkable. By around 6 p.m., the trail went cold. The final sightings placed him near the Northwood Road area, close to a network of storm drains that ran beneath the city. It was a place unfamiliar to Noah, far from where he had started his journey. Locals would later recall the eerie silence of that evening, as search helicopters circled overhead and police cars lined the streets. To investigators, the sequence of events seemed fragmented, disjointed. Why had Noah left behind his possessions? Why had he removed his clothes? And why had his route taken him to an area so far from his intended destination? For his mother, Fiona, the CCTV images were heartbreaking. Each frame showed her son slipping further away, out of reach, out of safety, and into a mystery that no one could yet explain. Noah's final known moments were preserved on grainy cameras and in fleeting witness accounts, but beyond that, darkness. The boy who had once been so full of life had simply vanished, and the answers, it seemed, were buried somewhere out of sight. As news of Noah's disappearance spread, Belfast began to move as one. Within hours of Fiona's desperate appeals, the community responded. Strangers who had never met the Donohoe family took to the streets, forming search parties that swept through parks, alleys, and neighborhoods. Volunteers carried torches into the night, calling out Noah's name, hoping for any sign of him. The police presence was heavy. Patrol cars combed the roads, while helicopters hovered above the city, their spotlights cutting through the darkness. Posters with Noah's face, his bright smile captured in a school photo, were shared online and plastered across lampposts. The hashtag #FindNoah quickly spread across social media, uniting people far beyond Belfast in the desperate hope that the boy would be found alive. Every clue mattered. Searchers scoured the areas where his belongings had been found, trying to piece together a trail that had grown cold too quickly. The discovery of his clothes and school bag deepened the unease. These weren't items someone like Noah would simply abandon. To many, it was as if the belongings had been deliberately scattered, each discovery raising more questions than it answered. For Fiona, the days were a blur of anguish. She spoke to the press, her voice steady, but her eyes betraying the unbearable fear of a mother waiting for her child to come home. "Please," she begged, "if anyone knows anything, help us bring Noah back." Her words carried across the city like an echo, pulling more and more people into the search. The atmosphere in Belfast was heavy with unease. Noah's disappearance didn't feel like an ordinary missing persons case. Something about the details, the CCTV, the discarded possessions, the sudden silence, made people feel that this was different, darker, more complicated. And as the hours stretched into days, hope began to thin. The search grew more focused, shifting toward the storm drains near Northwood Road, the last known location where Noah had been seen. It was a place most people would never venture, an underground maze of tunnels, silent and hidden beneath the city. As search teams prepared to enter the drains, the community waited in grim silence. Everyone wanted to believe Noah was still alive, but as time passed, a terrible sense of inevitability began to take hold. Something was waiting to be found in those dark tunnels, and it would change everything. By the third day of the search, the focus had narrowed to one unsettling possibility: the storm drains beneath Northwood Road. These drains stretched deep underground, a hidden labyrinth running beneath Belfast. Dark, damp, and dangerous, they were not the kind of place anyone would willingly enter, least of all a boy like Noah. Search teams moved carefully, crawling through the narrow openings with specialist equipment. Torches cut thin beams of light into the blackness, illuminating walls slick with moisture. The air was heavy and still, and every sound echoed through the tunnels. To those searching, it was a haunting environment, a place that seemed to hold secrets. It was near this system that pieces of Noah's trail reappeared. His bike was recovered close to the entrance of the drains, abandoned and left behind. For investigators, it was both a breakthrough and a chilling discovery. If Noah had somehow entered the drains, then the search had reached its most dangerous stage. But questions lingered. Why would he go in there? The drains were tight, pitch black, and hazardous, especially for someone unfamiliar with their layout. Noah was intelligent, cautious, and not reckless. The idea of him choosing to crawl into such a place on his own seemed almost impossible to those who knew him. Still, the evidence led there. Police, divers, and rescue crews worked around the clock, navigating the treacherous system inch by inch. The community waited above ground, hearts heavy, fearing what the searchers might find. Every discovery, the scattered belongings, the abandoned bicycle, only added to the unease. It was as if the storm drains had swallowed Noah whole, pulling him into a world where the truth would be harder to uncover. For Fiona, the thought of her son lost in those tunnels was unbearable. Yet she held on to hope, clinging to the possibility that Noah was still alive, that he might be found and brought back safely. The city shared that hope with her, but in the quiet corners of Belfast, an unspoken dread was growing stronger. Deep down, people feared the storm drains held not salvation, but tragedy. On June 27, 2020, 6 long days after Noah disappeared, the search came to an end. Police divers, working inside the storm drain system beneath Northwood Road, made the discovery everyone had been dreading. In the cold, dark water, they found the body of 14-year-old Noah Donohoe. The news spread across Belfast like a shockwave. For a week, the city had held its breath, clinging to hope that Noah would be found alive. But now, that hope collapsed into grief. Strangers wept as though they had lost one of their own. Candlelit vigils were held, flowers laid at storm drain entrances, and murals painted in his memory. In a city used to tragedy, Noah's death struck a unique chord. It felt deeply wrong, as if something precious had been stolen. The Police Service of Northern Ireland, PSNI, announced that Noah's death was not being treated as suspicious. The initial post-mortem concluded that he had died by drowning. It was suggested that he had somehow entered the drains voluntarily and that no other person was involved. To investigators, this was the end of the story. But to Fiona, Noah's mother, and to many in the wider community, that explanation made little sense. Noah had been an intelligent, cautious, and grounded boy. He had set out for a bike ride to Cave Hill, not an underground tunnel. Why would he abandon his possessions? Why would he strip off his clothes? Why would he enter such a dangerous place on his own? The official narrative clashed with the Noah that people knew. Fiona rejected the idea that her son had simply stumbled into the drains and drowned. To her, there were too many gaps, too many unanswered questions. And as more details emerged, those questions only grew louder. For Belfast, the discovery of Noah's body did not bring closure. It brought grief, outrage, and a creeping suspicion that the full truth of what happened to the bright, smiling boy was being hidden in the shadows. The mystery was far from over. In many ways, it had only just begun. As the city searched desperately for Noah, his image printed on posters and flashed across news bulletins, another story was quietly unfolding in the shadows. It was a story that would add yet another layer of heartbreak and disbelief to an already devastating case. Only hours after Noah vanished, his school rucksack, containing his laptop, his school books, and personal belongings, was no longer with him. Instead, it had fallen into the hands of a man named Daryl Paul. Rather than return the items, Paul made a choice that horrified the public once it became known. He carried Noah's possessions, not as evidence of a missing child, but as an opportunity. Days into the frantic search, Paul walked into a cash converter's shop in Belfast. Alongside him was a woman named Maria Nolan. Together they attempted to pawn the laptop, hoping to trade the lost boy's belongings for cash. The staff, wary and suspicious, refused. But Paul did not stop there. He allegedly tried to sell the laptop elsewhere, even offering it to strangers. Meanwhile, Noah's family and hundreds of volunteers combed streets, rivers, and alleys, unaware that the missing boy's possessions were being treated as currency by opportunists. Eventually, police recovered the rucksack and books from Paul's home. The laptop later traced to Nolan's accommodation. Noah's name was written clearly in his school books, a chilling reminder of who the items truly belonged to. In court, Paul admitted theft. He was sentenced to 3 months in prison, the judge describing his actions as opportunistic. Nolan was convicted of handling stolen goods, the court finding that she had taken an active role in the attempted pawn sale. Both were denounced publicly, not only for their crimes, but for the sheer callousness of what they represented. For Fiona, and for many others who loved Noah, this episode was almost unbearable. While her son's face looked out from every news bulletin, while strangers searched drains, alleys, and fields, others had chosen to profit from his disappearance. It was a cruel twist in a tragedy already overflowing with unanswered questions. And it deepened the sense that Noah's story was not only about loss, but also about betrayal. Betrayal by circumstance, by secrecy, and now, by opportunism. Noah's body may have been found, but the discovery did not close the case in the eyes of his family, or the public. Instead, it opened the door to a maze of troubling questions that refused to go away. The timeline itself was fractured. CCTV footage only showed fragments of Noah's journey, leaving unexplained gaps. At one point, he was seen riding calmly on his bike, but shortly after, his belongings began to appear scattered across the city. His backpack, laptop, books, and helmet were all discovered in different places, as though carefully dropped along a trail. Why would a 14-year-old boy, known to be sensible and focused, abandon items he valued so deeply? And then there was the most baffling detail: his clothing. Witnesses reported seeing Noah cycling without clothes, exposed and vulnerable. For a shy, modest teenager, this was unimaginable. Theories emerged. Was he disoriented? Frightened? Forced? No one could explain what had driven such behavior. Questions also surrounded his phone, a device that could have offered crucial insight into his state of mind, his movements, or any communication in those final hours. Yet, the phone had not been recovered with his body. Where had it gone? Why had it vanished when every other detail of his disappearance suggested it should have been with him? Even the location of his body sparked doubt. The storm drain was a dangerous, claustrophobic place, its openings narrow and its tunnels stretching deep underground. Locals who knew the area insisted that it wasn't somewhere a child would willingly enter. Certainly not Noah, who had no reason to be there. How then had he ended up inside? For Fiona, none of it made sense. She believed that something had happened to her son that was not being told. She knew Noah better than anyone, and the official story felt like a stranger's version of him, a narrative that didn't fit the boy she raised. The community echoed her doubts. Across Belfast, whispers of suspicion grew louder. People spoke of inconsistencies, of unanswered questions, of details that seemed to be brushed aside. To them, Noah's death wasn't an open and shut tragedy. It was a puzzle, one that someone didn't want solved. And as Fiona began her public campaign for truth, her voice cut through the silence. She refused to let Noah's story be dismissed, refused to let the unanswered questions fade away. Her determination turned personal grief into something larger, a fight for justice that would capture the attention of the entire country. In the months after Noah's death, the investigation became overshadowed not by clarity, but by secrecy. The Police Service of Northern Ireland, PSNI, insisted from the beginning that there was nothing suspicious about Noah's disappearance or death. To them, it was a tragic accident, a young boy who had somehow entered a storm drain and drowned. But the way the case was handled only fueled suspicion. Central to the controversy was the use of public interest immunity certificates, or PIIs. These legal instruments allow police to withhold certain information from court proceedings on the grounds that releasing it could damage national security or public safety. In Noah's case, the PSNI applied for PIIs to block the disclosure of sensitive material relating to his death. To Fiona and her supporters, this decision was devastating. What could possibly be so sensitive about the death of a 14-year-old boy on a bike ride? Why would national security laws need to shield information in a case that, according to police, was straightforward and non-suspicious? Each step seemed to widen the gap between the official narrative and public perception. Rather than bringing comfort, the secrecy raised fears of a cover-up. People began to question whether all the facts were being hidden, whether powerful forces were working to keep certain truths from emerging. The distrust only deepened when reports surfaced of missing evidence, incomplete CCTV footage, and inconsistencies in the official timeline. Every withheld document, every redacted file became another reason for suspicion. For Fiona, the secrecy was unbearable. She wasn't just a grieving mother. She was now a campaigner, forced to fight the very institutions that should have been helping her. Time and again she demanded answers, only to be met with silence or bureaucratic walls. To her, it felt as though the truth about Noah had been locked away, placed beyond her reach. And yet, she refused to give up. The secrecy may have shrouded Noah's case, but Fiona's determination to uncover the truth only grew stronger. She carried her fight into the public eye, turning her son's story into a symbol, not only of loss, but of resistance against silence. The PSNI's secrecy hadn't ended the questions. It had only multiplied them. For most parents, grief is a private thing, a wound carried in silence. But for Fiona Donohoe, silence was never an option. From the moment Noah disappeared, she understood that she could not simply rely on official answers. If she wanted the truth about her son, she would have to fight for it herself. In the weeks following Noah's death, Fiona became the voice of a movement. Standing in front of cameras, speaking with calm determination, She refused to let Noah's story fade into a quiet statistic. Her message was clear. There were too many unanswered questions, and she would not stop until those answers were found. Support poured in from across Belfast and far beyond. Thousands joined online groups dedicated to Noah's memory, using the hashtag #JusticeForNoah to keep his story alive. Vigils were held, murals painted in his honor, and marches organized through the city streets. Ordinary people, many of whom had never met Noah, stood beside Fiona, sharing her belief that something was being hidden. Her campaign was not just about grief, it was about accountability. Fiona called on the PSNI, government officials, and legal authorities to release all information relating to Noah's case. She questioned why secrecy orders were being used, why key evidence remained out of reach, and why the narrative surrounding her son's final hours didn't add up. The louder Fiona spoke, the more others joined her. Politicians began raising Noah's case in official forums, while journalists probed the inconsistencies. The more resistance she faced, the more determined she became. To Fiona, this was not just about her child. It was about every parent's right to know the truth. But campaigning came at a cost. Fiona faced not only the weight of her grief, but also the burden of fighting institutions far larger and more powerful than herself. Online trolls targeted her, whispering cruel rumors meant to discredit her. Still, she refused to be silenced. Her strength, even in the face of relentless heartbreak, became an inspiration to many. Noah's name had become more than a memory. It was now a rallying cry, a reminder that truth and justice must never be buried, no matter how inconvenient they might be for those in power. And as the campaign grew, so too did the theories. If the official story didn't add up, then what really happened to Noah Donohoe? From the very beginning, Noah Donohoe's death carried a weight of suspicion. The details didn't line up with the boy people knew, and the secrecy surrounding the investigation only deepened public doubt. Soon, theories began to circulate. Whispers of conspiracy, suggestions of a cover-up, and speculation that powerful forces were at play. Some believed Noah may have witnessed something he was never meant to see. Others speculated that he could have been attacked or chased, his strange behavior a result of fear or trauma. The fact that his belongings were scattered across different locations only added to the unease. Was it random or deliberate? The storm drains themselves became a focus of suspicion. Locals insisted it was unlikely Noah would willingly enter them, particularly without clothes. For some, this suggested foul play. Perhaps he had been forced, or perhaps his body had been placed there afterwards. The very idea was chilling, but it could not be dismissed when weighed against the inconsistencies. Then there was the secrecy. The use of public interest immunity certificates, rare in a case involving a child, fueled the idea that the truth was being deliberately hidden. What could possibly connect Noah's death to matters of national security? To many, the answer was simple: nothing, which left only one explanation. Something was being protected, and it wasn't Noah. Conspiracy theories flourished online. Some pointed to paramilitary groups, suggesting Noah had crossed paths with dangerous individuals. Others believed his case was linked to historic scandals in Belfast, cover-ups of abuse, corruption, or institutional failings. None of these theories were proven, but the lack of transparency created a vacuum where speculation thrived. For Fiona, the theories were a double-edged sword. On one hand, they kept public attention alive, reminding the world that her son's case was far from settled. On the other, they risked drowning the truth in rumor, making it harder to separate fact from fiction. Yet Fiona understood one thing with certainty: when officials hide information, suspicion is inevitable. The truth about Noah's final hours remained locked away, but one reality could not be denied. People no longer trusted the official story. And as the conspiracy theories spread, pressure on the authorities grew stronger. The question was no longer just what happened to Noah Donohoe. It had become something larger, something far more dangerous. Who wanted the truth to stay buried? For Fiona Donohoe, the fight for truth eventually reached the courtroom. The coroner's inquest, the legal process designed to examine how Noah died, was meant to provide answers. Instead, it became yet another chapter of delay, secrecy, and frustration. From the outset, progress was slow. Hearings were repeatedly postponed, adjournments piled up, and deadlines slipped away. Each delay was another cruel weight on Fiona's shoulders, prolonging her grief and preventing the closure she desperately needed. To many, it felt as if the system was deliberately dragging its feet. When the hearings finally began, the proceedings were far from straightforward. The PSNI continued to insist that Noah's death was not suspicious. Their narrative remained the same: a tragic accident, a boy who somehow entered the storm drains of his own accord. But Fiona and her legal team challenged that version, pointing to the gaps in the evidence and the disturbing use of public interest immunity certificates to withhold key information. The secrecy dominated the inquest. Critical files were redacted, and certain witnesses were restricted in what they could say. Even the coroner expressed concern about the limits placed on the process. For the Donohoe family, it felt less like a search for truth and more like a battle against walls built to keep the truth hidden. Outside the courtroom, support for Fiona never wavered. Each hearing drew crowds of supporters, holding placards and chanting Noah's name. Social media campaigns amplified every development, ensuring that the case could not quietly disappear into the shadows. Noah's inquest had become more than a legal process. It was now a test of transparency, a question of whether ordinary families could ever trust the institutions meant to serve them. Still, the inquest has yet to deliver the clarity Fiona seeks. Years have passed since Noah's death, yet many of the most pressing questions remain unanswered. Why did Noah's belongings appear scattered across the city? Why were key pieces of evidence withheld? And why was national security ever cited in the case of a missing schoolboy? For Fiona, the inquest is not about legal arguments. It is about her son, about the boy who left home on a bike ride and never came back, about the truth she promised him she would find, no matter how long it took. And so the courtroom battles continue. Each step feels like progress, but the truth, real, unfiltered truth, remains just out of reach. Though Noah's life was tragically cut short, his story did not end in the storm drains of Belfast. In many ways, it was only the beginning. His death and the unanswered questions that surround it changed the city and left a mark on the people who came to know him, even if only through his mother's words. To those who loved him, Noah is remembered not for the mystery of his death, but for the brightness of his life. A gifted student, a talented athlete, a kind and gentle boy, his friends recall his humor, his loyalty, and his quiet brilliance. His teachers speak of his promise, his determination to achieve, and the limitless potential that was stolen away. For Fiona, Noah's legacy is her fight. She has turned unimaginable grief into a campaign that refuses to be silenced, demanding truth and accountability, not only for her son, but for every family who finds themselves up against powerful institutions. Her courage has inspired thousands, her determination reminding the world that no mother should ever have to beg for honesty about her child's death. Across Belfast, Noah's name has become a symbol. Murals of his face look down from walls, vigils are held in his memory, and marches continue to demand justice. The hashtags Justice for Noah and Noah's Army echo across social media, a digital testament to a community that refuses to forget him. But Noah's legacy extends beyond Belfast. His story raises uncomfortable questions about transparency, trust in institutions, and how tragedies are handled when they do not fit easy narratives. It asks why secrecy was allowed to cloud a child's death, and why a grieving mother has had to fight so hard for answers that should have been freely given. Noah's story matters because it reminds us of what is at stake when truth is hidden. It matters because behind the headlines was a boy, bright, full of life, loved deeply, and a mother who refuses to let his voice be silenced. And so, even years after his disappearance, Noah lives on, in the murals, in the vigils, in the chants for justice, in every parent who sees Fiona's strength and knows they would fight just the same. His name has become a call for truth, for fairness, for accountability. Noah Donohoe was only 14, but his story has become something far greater. A reminder that even in the darkest of tragedies, love can light a path, and a mother's fight can echo louder than silence.